It has been a long 6 months since Warhammer 40,000 Darktide was released, but here we are. With all that time having come and gone, has the dust settled? Is the game in a better state? Has the 90% fall off in average users from November to now been justified? Are we finally at the promised land of the live service game with quarterly content drops and a robust system of reliable releases? Not really. Now, I don't want you to think this entire video is going to be me negatively ranting about the game and proclaiming it as the worst thing to happen to 40K. Nay, that is Matt Ward. In fact, the game is probably one of the absolute best representations of the 40K universe. The atmosphere, the music, everything is absolutely dripping with all the grungy artwork we all grew up with. From the descriptions of the weird physics of underhives to the wild environs therein. Further, the game is actually in the best state it has ever been, with all the features that were promised at or slightly after launch now being fully implemented into the game. Stability, performance, all these things are absolutely banging right now. I just want to make these statements up front because maybe you haven't picked up the game yet and were wondering if it's finally time. Honestly, the answer is yes. My frustration comes from putting in well over 400 hours into the game. And at $40, that's a great goddamn time. That's the crux of it though, right? I'm making this video not because I hate the game and I'm angry, but because I love the game, atmosphere, and see the gross potential that lays before us. One final note here, make sure your criticism of the game lands on that of the game itself, and not the people that are in the trenches making it. Community managers, actual game developers, these people share your passion for the game, or at the very least, they don't make the business decisions on what happens as far as content releases and what have you. So just make sure you're not attacking these folks on Discord, Reddits, and whatever it may be, because they are probably our biggest advocates for change within any company you're dealing with. Absolutely. Make your voice heard and explain what you want out of the game. The only way we'll get to where we want in any game title is making sure we, as the consumers, are clearly stating what about the game is preventing us from having fun and some proposed solutions, because we all want a better Darktide. Before we get started, don't forget to follow me on Twitch, where I stream Darktide and a plethora of other games, including Bolt Gun coming out just around the corner. Let's get started here on whether or not Darktide will ever recover. So establishing the problem is our first step here. And it's easy to say that the problem is the game's not the way I want it, whatever that is. But really we have to kind of look at what the issue is. And the biggest issue is that there is a certain dirge of content after you get over a certain point in the game. And once you get a certain level of items, you know, you have plenty of the ones that you want. I mean, I'm playing around with a green one to try out with this Thunder Hammer. But once you get to a certain point, stuff becomes trivial in the sense that when you take a look at the mission terminal and you look at all the maps available to you, you have the hardest difficulty, and barring modifiers, you really have no way to truly challenge yourself. And you can go ahead and play another character. That's definitely the best way to get more replayability out of the game. But once you've gone ahead and done that, you're now out. You've played all the maps, you've mastered the hardest difficulty, which admittedly is getting easier and easier with every single patch because they're buffing up certain things or nerfing certain aspects of those difficulties, whatever it is. So these difficulties, which used to be, if you were doing the tier 5 difficulty, you were usually doing this because you were like a top tier player, quote unquote, right? And the bell curve of people usually landed in that tier 2, 3, maybe sometimes 4. But that bell curve is now pushed and shifted, where a lot of people now, more often than not, play 4, if not 5. So you have that as the biggest issue with the game, wherein the top difficulty isn't very hard. You run out of content, you run out of maps. Those are the big 3 things that you're going to hit. So how do you address those things? How do you face them? Let's start taking them apart one at a time. So the biggest thing that they can do to the game, obviously, is add in other subclasses, right? We have the Zealot Preacher, so we want other Zealots or other Preachers, whichever one's the main and whichever one's the subclass, however they want to do it, right? We've seen it plenty of times when we take a look at Vermintide 2, every single character launched with 3 other classes that you unlocked throughout the leveling of that character. So that is a huge step. And the reason that this is a big thing is because it allows us to play the existing gameplay loop in a different fashion, much in the same way it does as playing a new character. Now, that is obviously a no-brainer. Obviously, adding another class does a lot to the game. It allows me to play the Zealot in a whole different route. You know, there's some data mining that has been done for 4 existing classes within the code that people are thinking are the next classes to come to the game. 1 for each one of our main archetypes. I don't know how I want to say this. I guess archetype would be the Zealot, Preacher would be the subclass of the class of the Zealot. And we've seen that these exist, right? Like our veteran sharpshooter, we've seen a veteran sergeant. The big guy, the Ogren, we've seen a gun lugger for him. So we've seen a bunch of different ways to approach these classes and these races, these archetypes. And I think that's extremely important because we need that at this point. We were promised a new subclass every quarter. And that is a huge step forward for us because we really need it as a point to, like I said, give us a way to play the game in a different way. And that is absolutely huge. Another big crucial portion of this is the items. Now, I think adding items to the game doesn't necessarily do a whole ton. Like, let's take a look now. And if you've not played in ages, now you can just simply buy a gray blueprint of an item and you just go ahead and get a version of the item. And I'll talk about that in just a little second here. But I think adding more axes or more chain axes or more assault chain swords, whatever it is, while cool and fun, it doesn't really do much. Like we've gotten the new Thunderhammer, which is a different version of our Crucius Thunderhammer. It allows us to do sweeping, cleaving attacks, has a different charge attack, all sorts of different things. That's fun and all, but we were promised the ability to use both melee and ranged at the same time. So using a pistol with a chainsword. That is a true spice or different approach to the game because you're breaking the hybrid range, hybrid main melee kind of projection they've created for the game. You're like, okay, you're using a melee weapon here and a ranged weapon here. No, give me one that links both together and I'm using them simultaneously to create a different play style, to create a different way to approach the game. And I think that that's pretty crucial. On this note of items too and changing how they work, I think there's too much RNG to just this portion. I understand the issues we're going to have in just a little bit when I talk about the modifying them, but I think that when you go ahead to press acquire, they should come out at a set item range. Now this is something that we've wanted since this Brunt's army was actually added into the game, and it's nothing I've seen in the patch notes that they've updated. It might have been, and you guys can go ahead and correct me in the comment section below, like, hey, actually they added that a patch ago. But if I'm the max level, I don't need a 180 or a 200 item level infantry autogun because that then dictates the chance or the rarity of the blue blessings that I add to the weapon. So give me like not the highest, but maybe give me an interval. Like, hey, everything after the max level of 20 or 25, 20, 25, 20, 30. God, I'm all over the place. After the max level of 30, any weapon you pull from Brunt's armory is 350 plus minimum. At least that I can work with. That I can do some tinkering with. Because it doesn't need to be the max 380. It can just kind of be around there. Let me play around with it. But I think that's a big step in reducing a lot of the monotony and what is essentially a gold sink in the game. It's an artificial way to just kind of deplete people's gold without actually contributing anything to their replayability by just saying, yeah, go gamble on this and hope you get something that you work with, because then it brings us to our next issue within this existing system, is that once you come over here to the Shrine of the Omnissiah, we can do cool things now. So if you played the game at launch, you probably didn't know that you can now do this, but you can now re-bless or rip off the blessing of an item and add it to whatever item you want. That's sick. I love it. But there's still an RNG factor here, and it's not necessarily too exciting. Because if I want to refine an item, I want to swap off a perk. And that rolls a random perk. And that's just not necessary. Why make me refine this until I get to the point where I can get it for free? By the way, they swapped these on opposite ends for whatever reason. I'm going to refine this for free because I've spent the resources. And now I'm just going to press RNG until I get the actual perk that I want. If you're going to add that system, let me pay the fee up front and just let me choose from a list. Sure, if you're going to do the locking thing, keep the locking thing in. That's fine. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of it, but if you're at least going to do that portion and make it so that I can basically break it to the point where it is free, just let me choose from a list. What's the point of me pressing refine a bunch of times or using a mod that does it for me? Like, just make it easier for the end user to accomplish the exact weapon that they want, while working within the constraints of the system you have in mind. I think that changing these little things about items makes the game a lot more approachable to someone who maybe is jumping in for the first time and sees, oh, this is an exciting thing to kind of build out the weapon I want with the perks and the blessings I want. But once you really dig into the system, you're like, man, this is tedious, and now I'm annoyed that I got a perfect 380, but I got a terrible set of terrible set of perks here. Like +1 stamina just happens to be decent enough on a heavy eviscerator, but maybe you get something that's absolutely god-awful here, and now the weapon feels completely subpar because you're choosing between rolling for something that you want and locking something you hate. And even then into blessings, you hope that you get at least a solid blessing because you're rolling one off for the one that you want. So it gets to be a little bit of too much gambling and RNG because there's too many stages that create almost this great filter. I'm talking about the Fermi paradox over here. It creates a filter that prevents you from actually having the weapon you want because you're artificially having to, oh, well, that scrapped my entire weapon because that perk is trash, or my perk or my blessing is trash. And unfortunately, in a game like this, it does encourage min-maxing to approach the maximum difficulties with at least some modicum of ease because it's already stacked up against you. Which brings me to my next point. Let's talk about some maps and difficulties. So as it stands in the game right now, we have more maps that are populated every handful of minutes. And as you can see, they're on their own little timers, these little bars right here. So in 17 minutes and 34 seconds, this map will swap off. And that's great. I think that, and it's not great. I'm sorry. I do not like that system. I meant to say the map selection we have is great. It's fine. But we need more. Now, there's a double-edged sword of that. It's going to be my last point. Adding more maps is great because it allows us to get a lot of more variety to the game. But the problem with the map system as it currently stands is, let's say that this was the new map added to the game. This is only here on this map rotation right now. This is the only instance of it. And hopefully in 6 minutes or 7 minutes, in 8 minutes, or in 16 minutes, or in 4 minutes, one of these rotates off and it generates complex throne side, which is coincidentally the newest map, I believe, in a difficulty I want, because I sure as shit don't want to play it on the lowest difficulty. And that's the biggest problem with our map system. Yeah, sure, add more maps. I'm stoked on it. But the problem is that we're going to hit this situation where I can play the map if I'm lucky enough to find it on the actual map board and in the difficulty I want. That is the biggest issue with adding more maps. I think it's great. I think it adds nice spice to the game, but it's not a reliable spice to the game. It's not an ability for me to just simply log on, play the map I want, log off. I cannot do that like I could in Vermintide 1 or 2. I'm stuck here waiting to hope that the map actually populates. And when you remember when this map actually came out, it did not populate for a handful of hours, let alone on a difficulty that was worthy really trying to see how the map really performed. It was populating on difficulties. Oh, we just got lucky and it populated on a 5. Man, this whole entire video is invalid. But still, my point remains that you have to wait for this thing to pop up in the rotation, and it makes it very frustrating. I understand there's probably some sort of development limitations behind this that I have no idea how they work. It's not as simple as flipping a switch. But still, my point remains, outside of that this creates, while maps being a really cool, fun thing to add to the game, it doesn't really do much to bring a whole ton of replayability, since you are limited in the chance to actually even replay the map. Which brings me to my final fact, and the thing I think we need first and foremost amongst anything else in this list and the things that we've talked about. Yes, I think we need subclasses ASAP because it brings a bunch of spice to the game. Revamped a little bit of things with the item system to make it a little bit more spicy. Give me some new maps. Give me some melee and range weapons. We need that. We want that. We've been seeing that from past, press releases. But this is the biggest thing. Because right now, with the way that the game works, and the amount of patches that we've gotten, the amount of buffs that we've gotten, the amount of nerfs that exist, level 5 difficulty is no longer the hardest difficulty. I mean, it's just, most people play it. It's not that difficult. Level 5 on high intensity with another modifier is truly probably, and all grimoires, that's your hardest difficulty probably. But the problem is it's just going to keep getting weaker. So the real true actual addition to content in this game is a 6th difficulty, is our whatever the hell it was in Vermintide 2, right? Champion or whatever. Because that takes all the existing gameplay and makes it valid again and makes it harder and makes it so that every single thing here, all the existing maps, all the existing items, all the existing classes now have different spice to approach them, because now that I have a whole new difficulty, I maybe need to min-max a weapon differently. Maybe because the way that difficulty approaches things, I need to change the way I approach a map entirely. Maybe I'm now going to have to change my talent setup for my classes. I think every single thing in the game, yeah, sure, it could always be improved with patches. Adding subclasses is something that we all want. But I think truly what we need is a new difficulty, because it's the only way. If we add a new class, you're going to just fall into the same exact gameplay loop after you learn the class through and through the first, like 10, 15 levels, so you really have a good mind for it. Most classes come online around 15 to 20, right? So I think truly, above everything, is that addition of a new difficulty. Give us that 6th edition, give us that true actual way to approach the game in a harder fashion, and we'll really finally be off to a point where we can push a lot of new boundaries. Because I think everything else at this point is just going to be a lot of the same stuff. So that's really my short and narrow of what Darktide needs to actually continue to be a really good game. And like I've said, continue to be a good game. It's not terrible. It's not shit like it was when it launched, where you had a whole bunch of performance issues, you had a bunch of crashing, all those things. But even through that, it was still a goddamn great game, because it nailed that 40K aesthetic. You had so much fun ripping through stuff. It was still really fun in the beginning, despite the fact that it was just marred with a really rough launch. And I think a lot of this kind of falls on Fat Shark's approach to how they've dealt with the launch. You had an insane amount of momentum, right? 46 some thousand on launch, down to an average of just shy of 4,000. That is a massive drop off in player base. And it comes down to the first 2 months of the year having been a very slow comeback for them. This is, of course, a company that's based in Europe who has a whole entirely different holiday schedule and day off schedule than they do in the US. And I guess, that's how I look at things from someone who has worked in the corporate world of America, who's soul crushing corporate world of America. But still, you'd think for a game that was launching as a live service game, coming into its first real handful of months or quarter of launch, you would have some things lined up prior to going on that holiday. And I think that now that they've come out of that holiday, they've come out really guns blazing, adding things to the game, giving us new weapons. But I still think we are just at that point. It's a final tipping point. And I think the biggest point that I want to make too with all this, I feel like the video is going to be totally invalid next week, because Warhammer Games Workshop Skulls is going to happen next week, right? And that means we're going to get content for all existing games, or some sales on all existing games that are their digital IPs, and also announcements of new ones, or maybe release schedules. I'm sure we'll find out the release of Space Marine 2 come next Thursday, next Friday, whenever Skulls is. So while all this is really things that we want, I'm sure that we'll probably, hopefully get an announcement next week from Fat Shark where they say, hey, you've been waiting for it, Warhammer Skulls, the next class is an Eldar. It won't be, but still my fact remains, right? And even then, I didn't even mention adding a whole new archetype, like the, not a halfling, the rattling sniper, like a lot of people have speculated. I would personally love to see a Corsair, probably not going to happen, or a new enemy type. There are plenty of things that I did not mention in this video that I think could go a long way to making Darktide even better, or pushing it beyond that kind of early slow starts period. So if there's things that you really want to see in the game, maybe it's that entirely different hide that they talk about in all the conversations. Maybe it is the what's it called? The Gene Stealer cults that we have kind of heard mentioning of distantly. Finally, the Chaos Bonds, whatever it is, let it be known in the comment section below, because there are tons of things that we have heard about in press releases and other things that have yet to kind of make their way into the game. And I'd love to get an idea of how you feel the game, or what you feel the game truly needs to continue, or to actually be the game that you want. I know for me, like I've said, it's difficulty. We need that way to kind of replay the game in a new, better, harder, faster light. So go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. As always, guys, keep in mind that this is just my opinion. If you don't agree with the opinion, that's totally fine. You might think that the game is in an amazing place. Like I said, we cannot attack each other. We have to simply communicate what we want with the game to hopefully make it be the game that we want Darktide to be. But as always, have a good one. Thanks so much for watching here today, and take care.